That dinner party changed everything. The crystal glasses clinked, laughter echoed through the room, and my world shattered with just one sentence. I can still feel the weight of that moment, the way time seemed to freeze as James's words cut through the ambient chatter of our friend's dining room. "You're just a supporting character in my life, Sarah. Without me, you'd be nothing." The room fell silent. Our closest friends, people we'd known for 15 years, sat frozen, wine glasses halfway to their lips. I watched as Emily, my best friend since college, gripped her husband Mike's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. But what struck me most was the casual cruelty in James's voice, as if he were simply commenting on the weather. I'd spent 12 years of my life with this man. 12 years of supporting his dreams, managing our home, and gradually dimming my own light to make his shine brighter. I was an honors graduate in business administration from Stanford, yet somewhere along the way I'd become James Morrison's wife. Nothing more, nothing less. The signs had always been there, I suppose. The subtle way he'd dismiss my ideas during dinner conversations with his colleagues. How he'd interrupt me mid-sentence to offer his more informed opinion. The constant reminders of how lucky I was to have married someone so successful. But that night, something inside me finally broke. I remember excusing myself from the table, my movements mechanical, my smile fixed in place like a porcelain mask. In the elegant bathroom of our friend's home, I stared at my reflection, a woman I barely recognized anymore. At 42, I still had the same green eyes and auburn hair, but somewhere along the way, the spark in those eyes had dimmed. When had I started looking so defeated? The worst part wasn't even the public humiliation. It was the realization that I had allowed this to happen. Step by step, compromise by compromise, I had participated in my own diminishment. Every time I'd swallowed my words to keep the peace, every time I'd set aside my ambitions to support his, I'd handed over another piece of myself. That night, as we drove home in frigid silence, my mind wandered back to the business plan hidden in my personal laptop. For months, I'd been developing an idea for a tech platform that would revolutionize how small businesses handle their inventory management. It was more than just a business plan. It was a dream I'd buried under years of matrimonial compromise. James tried to apologize the next morning, in his way. "You're being oversensitive," he said, barely looking up from his phone. I was just joking. Everyone knew that. But this time, his words didn't land. Instead, they strengthened my resolve. I spent the next week in a strange state of clarity, watching our relationship as if through new eyes. I noticed how he'd never ask about my day, how he'd dismiss my opinions with a wave of his hand, how he'd make plans that affected both our lives without even consulting me. Each observation was another brick in the wall of my determination. 2 weeks after the dinner party, I made my first move. I scheduled a meeting with a divorce lawyer during my lunch break. The following day, I reached out to my old college roommate, Lisa, who'd become a successful venture capitalist. The day after that, I opened a separate bank account. What James didn't know, what he'd never bothered to ask about, was that I'd been freelancing as a business consultant for the past 3 years. Those book club meetings on Tuesday nights? Actually client consultations. The yoga classes on Saturday mornings. Networking events with other women entrepreneurs. I had built a solid foundation right under his nose, and he'd been too self-absorbed to notice. But as I lay in bed each night, staring at the ceiling of our luxury apartment, doubt would creep in. Was I really ready to walk away from the security of my marriage? Could I actually succeed on my own? The voice of uncertainty sounded suspiciously like James's, condescending, dismissive, sure of my inevitable failure. Then I'd remember his words at the dinner party, and my resolve would harden again. I wasn't just fighting for my independence anymore. I was fighting for every woman who'd ever been told she was just a wife, just a supporter, just a supporting character in someone else's story. What I didn't know then was that James had his own secrets. Secrets that would soon turn our divorce from a clean break into something far more complicated. But that night, as I finalized my plans, all I knew was that I was finally ready to become the protagonist of my own life. The next morning, I had a breakfast meeting that would change everything, though not in the way I expected. As I walked into the coffee shop, my laptop containing my business plan tucked under my arm, I had no idea that I was about to uncover something that would make the dinner party incident seem like a minor disagreement in comparison. The coffee shop was bustling with morning traffic when I arrived. I'd chosen this place specifically because James would never set foot in such a mediocre establishment. As I waited for Lisa, my old college roommate turned venture capitalist, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to cross a point of no return. Lisa was exactly as I remembered her, sharp, direct, and fiercely loyal. She arrived precisely on time, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, reading glasses perched on her nose. But something in her expression made my stomach drop. "Sarah," she said, settling into her chair, "before we discuss your business plan, there's something you need to know." She pulled out her tablet and turned it towards me. One of my junior analysts was doing routine due diligence on potential investments when she came across this. What I saw on that screen made my coffee turn bitter in my mouth. There, in neat spreadsheets and detailed documents, was evidence that James had been systematically diverting funds from his company's accounts, not to mention our joint accounts, into a series of shell companies. But what truly made my blood run cold was the name listed as co-owner on these companies, Rebecca Chen, his 28-year-old executive assistant. "There's more," Lisa said gently, sliding her finger across the screen. "These companies have been active for the past 3 years. And Sarah, they've been using them to buy property, including a beach house in Malibu. The beach house. The one James had dismissed as too expensive when I'd suggested it for our 10th anniversary. The one he'd said was an irresponsible investment when I'd inherited money from my grandmother and proposed buying it myself. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the documents. Dates, amounts, property deeds. It was all there. The betrayal wasn't just emotional or personal anymore. It was financial too. And suddenly, all those late nights at the office, all those business trips to California, all those mysterious phone calls, everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. "I'm showing you this," Lisa continued, her voice steady, "because you need to protect yourself. If this comes out, and it will come out, it could affect everything. Your assets, your reputation, your future business ventures." I felt like I was watching myself from a distance as I sat there, processing what I'd just learned. The irony wasn't lost on me. James had called me a supporting character, all while I'd been playing a role in his elaborate deception without even knowing it. "There's something else," Lisa added, hesitating for the first time. "The timing of these transfers, they coincide with your freelance consulting deposits into your joint account. He's been using your legitimate income to help cover his tracks." That was when the anger finally broke through the shock. He hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd used my hard work, my integrity, my reputation as a shield for his fraud. Every dollar I'd earned helping small businesses streamline their operations had been used to legitimize his deception. But as I sat there, watching the morning crowd rush by outside, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling defeated, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about leaving James anymore. This was about reclaiming everything he'd taken from me. My confidence, my dreams, and now, my professional integrity. "Lisa," I said, pulling out my laptop, "I still want to show you my business plan. But first, I need your advice on something else. How do I protect myself without becoming collateral damage in his downfall?" The next 2 hours were a crash course in crisis management. Lisa introduced me to her personal attorney, a formidable woman named Helen Martinez, via video call. Together, they helped me outline a strategy that would legally and financially separate me from James's schemes while preserving evidence of my innocence. "Document everything," Helen advised. "Every conversation, every exchange, every unusual financial transaction you can remember. And whatever you do, don't confront him yet. We need to be strategic about this." As I left the coffee shop that afternoon, my head was spinning with legal terms and action items. But beneath the overwhelming complexity of it all, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. I had a clear enemy now, and it wasn't just James's emotional abuse. It was the entire web of lies he'd woven around our life together. That evening, I watched James move around our kitchen, complaining about his day, criticizing the way I'd organized the pantry, completely unaware that his carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. He even had the audacity to mention that Rebecca had done such a wonderful job organizing a new project at work. "You know," he said, pouring himself a glass of his precious wine, "you could learn a lot from Rebecca about professional organization." I smiled and nodded, the way I'd done countless times before. But this time, my silence wasn't born of submission. It was the quiet of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. In my home office, hidden behind a false bottom in my desk drawer that James had never bothered to notice, a USB drive now contained copies of every document Lisa had shown me. What I didn't realize then was that Rebecca wasn't just James's partner in crime. She was about to become an unexpected ally in my journey toward independence. But that revelation would have to wait until a chance encounter that would throw all my carefully laid plans into chaos. The encounter with Rebecca happened 3 weeks after my meeting with Lisa, in the last place I expected, the women's restroom of an upscale spa where I'd gone to clear my head. I was standing at the sink, staring at my reflection, and rehearsing what I'd say to James when everything finally came to light. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately from the company photos, though she looked different from the polished executive assistant I'd seen at corporate events. Her mascara was smudged, and her usual confident posture was nowhere to be seen. Our eyes met in the mirror, and for a moment, neither of us moved. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been trying to figure out how to contact you." My first instinct was to walk out, to avoid any interaction that might compromise the careful plan I'd been developing with Helen and Lisa. But something in her expression made me stay. "I know about the shell companies, Rebecca," I said, turning to face her. "I know about the beach house, the diverted funds, all of it." To my surprise, she let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you do. You're not the trophy wife he thinks you are." She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a USB drive. "What you don't know is that I've been gathering evidence against him for the past year." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "Why?" "Because James Morrison isn't just a fraud," she said, her voice hardening. "He's a predator. I'm not the first assistant he's manipulated into helping him with his schemes. I'm just the first one who fought back." Over the next hour, sitting in a quiet corner of the spa's lounge, Rebecca told me everything. How James had initially charmed her with promises of mentorship and career advancement. How he'd gradually drawn her into his financial schemes, using a combination of manipulation and subtle threats. How she'd discovered documents showing he'd done the same thing at his previous company, leaving another young assistant to take the fall when things went wrong. "At first, I thought I was special," she admitted, staring into her untouched green tea. "He made me feel like I was the only one who understood him, who could help him achieve his vision. By the time I realized what was really happening, I was already implicated in everything." I listened, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to hate her, to blame her for participating in James's betrayal. But as she spoke, I recognized the same patterns of manipulation and emotional abuse that I'd experienced in my own marriage. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" I asked. "Because he's got dirt on everyone, including me," she replied. "But more importantly, I wanted to make sure I had enough evidence to bring him down completely. No golden parachute, no elegant exit, no chance to charm his way into another company and start over." She showed me the contents of her USB drive. Emails, recorded conversations, detailed records of every transaction and manipulation. It was far more comprehensive than what Lisa had found. "There's something else," Rebecca added, hesitating. "He's planning to file for divorce first. He's already met with lawyers. He's going to try to paint you as a neglectful wife who was too busy with her little consulting hobby to support his career. He's even been planting seeds with your mutual friends, building his narrative." The familiar feeling of being 10 steps behind James threatened to overwhelm me. But this time, I pushed it back. "When?" I asked. "Next week. He's waiting for the quarter-end financials to be filed. He thinks it will give him better leverage in the settlement." I thought about the documents hidden in my office, the carefully crafted plan I'd developed with Helen and Lisa. James had no idea that I'd been preparing too, but now I realized my timeline needed to change. "Why are you helping me?" I finally asked Rebecca. She was quiet for a moment, fiddling with her teacup. "Because I saw you at that dinner party," she said eventually. "I was having dinner with friends at the same restaurant. I heard what he said to you, saw how he treated you, and I realized I couldn't be part of destroying another woman's life. We're both victims of his games, Mrs. Morrison. I think it's time we change the rules." As we sat there, two women brought together by the same man's betrayal, a new plan began to take shape, one that would require perfect timing, absolute discretion, and a level of courage I wasn't sure I possessed. "Call me Sarah," I said, reaching for my phone to text Helen. "We have work to do." What I didn't know then was that James had his own surveillance in place. Even as Rebecca and I plotted in that spa lounge, someone was watching. Someone who would report everything back to him. The next 24 hours would become a race against time, testing every ounce of resolve I'd built up over the past weeks. But first, I had one more person to contact. Someone whose role in this story would prove even more crucial than Rebecca's. My old mentor from Stanford, Dr. Catherine Roy, who happened to be an expert in corporate fraud, and, more importantly, had a personal score to settle with James Morrison. Dr. Catherine Roy's office at Stanford hadn't changed in the 15 years since I'd been her student. The same organized chaos of books and papers, the same worn leather chair where she'd counseled countless students through academic and personal crises, and the same fierce intelligence in her dark eyes as she reviewed the documents spread across her desk. "Your husband," she said slowly, removing her reading glasses, "is even more arrogant than I remembered." There was something in her tone that made me lean forward. "You know James?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Oh, yes," Catherine replied, a hint of steel in her voice. 10 years ago, he was involved in a similar scheme at Morton and Reed. I was brought in as a consultant to investigate some financial irregularities. He managed to pin everything on his assistant, a bright young woman named Claire Martinez. By the time I gathered enough evidence to prove his involvement, he'd already moved on to your current company, and Claire—" She paused, her expression darkening. Claire had already taken a plea deal. She served 14 months. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "Why didn't you pursue it?" "Statute of limitations," Catherine said grimly. "And James was very careful to ensure all roads led to Claire. But I've kept tabs on him ever since, waiting for him to make another mistake." She picked up Rebecca's USB drive. "And now, thanks to you and Ms. Chen, we have everything we need." Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Emergency. He knows. Meeting moved to tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. My heart started racing. James had planned to file for divorce next week, but now he was accelerating his timeline. We'd lost our advantage of surprise. Catherine must have seen the panic in my face because she immediately shifted into action mode. "Tell me you haven't been home since meeting Rebecca," she said sharply. "No, I came straight here." "Good." She was already dialing a number on her office phone. "Helen, it's Catherine Roy. We need to move now." "Yes, all of it. And get me Claire Martinez's current contact information." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Catherine's office became our command center as we coordinated with Helen, Lisa, and Rebecca. Claire Martinez, now working as a compliance officer in Seattle, joined us via video call. Her face hardened when she saw the evidence Rebecca had gathered. "History repeating itself," Claire said bitterly. "Same pattern, different victims. I'll be on the next flight to San Francisco." But even as we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. James was too smart, too calculating to be caught off guard completely. The fact that he'd discovered our alliance so quickly suggested he had more contingency plans than we knew about. "Catherine," I said suddenly, remembering something. "The night James and I met. It was at a Stanford alumni event. You introduced us." She looked up from her computer, her expression unreadable. "Yes, I did." "Why?" "You already knew what he was capable of." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "Because I thought you would see through him," she finally admitted. "You were my brightest student, Sarah. Your thesis on corporate fraud detection was revolutionary. I thought if anyone could expose him, it would be you. But then I watched as he slowly dimmed your light, year by year, and I blamed myself for not warning you. It wasn't your fault, I said, but she held up a hand. No, let me finish. I've spent 10 years watching James Morrison destroy lives while I gathered evidence that was never quite enough. But now, she gestured to the documents spread across her desk. Now we have everything. The question is, are you ready for what comes next? I thought about the woman I'd been at that dinner party, silently accepting James's public humiliation. I thought about Claire Martinez, who'd lost 14 months of her life to protect James's lies. I thought about Rebecca, trapped in a web of manipulation and deceit. I'm ready, I said, and I meant it. What I wasn't ready for was the message that popped up on my laptop screen at that moment, an email from James that made my blood run cold. Attached was a photo taken just hours ago at the spa, showing Rebecca and me deep in conversation. The message was simple. Coming home early, darling. We need to talk about your new friend. Catherine read the message over my shoulder and immediately reached for her phone. Helen? Change of plans. We need to move everything up, now. As night fell over the Stanford campus, we finalized our strategy. Tomorrow morning's meeting wouldn't just determine my future. It would decide the fate of every woman James had ever manipulated and betrayed. But first, I had to go home and face my husband, knowing that for the first time in our marriage, I held cards he didn't know about. What I didn't realize was that James had one more secret, one that would force me to make an impossible choice. And the person holding that secret was someone I'd trusted implicitly, someone who was sitting in that very room with us. The drive home felt like navigating through a dream. The familiar streets of our upscale neighborhood seemed somehow different, as if my new perspective had altered the very landscape of my life. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed James's car was already there, its presence as threatening as a storm cloud. I'd barely closed the front door when his voice came from the living room. Long day at the spa? The casual tone couldn't mask the underlying menace. James sat in his favorite leather armchair, looking exactly as he always did. Perfectly pressed suit, expertly styled hair, that familiar smile that never quite reached his eyes. On the coffee table in front of him lay a manila envelope. You know, he continued, not waiting for my response, loyalty is such an interesting concept. Take Emily, for instance, such a devoted friend to me. My heart stopped. Emily, my best friend since college. The one who'd gripped her husband's arm in shock at the dinner party. The one who'd been my confidant through years of James's subtle abuse. The one who... She's been keeping me informed about your little meetings, James said, opening the envelope. The coffee shop with Lisa. Your visits to that second-rate lawyer, Helen Martinez. Even your touching reunion with dear Professor Chen. He spread out photographs across the table. Surveillance photos that could only have come from someone following me. Emily's always been good at staying in the background, watching, reporting, just like she did at Stanford. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Emily hadn't just been reporting on me now. She'd been James's eyes and ears since college. The memory of Catherine's words echoed in my mind. I thought you would see through him. Had Emily been the one who orchestrated our meeting at that alumni event? Why? I managed to ask, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears. Money, mostly, James replied with a shrug. Emily's husband, Mike, isn't nearly as successful as she'd like people to believe. Those luxury vacations, the private school for their kids, the country club membership, all courtesy of my generous friendship. And of course, he added with a smirk, there's the matter of the evidence she helped me plant that sent Claire Martinez to prison. Each revelation was like another piece of glass in my heart. Every lunch where I'd confided in Emily, every tear I'd shed on her shoulder, every secret I'd shared, all of it had gone straight back to James. So, he continued, standing up with the fluid grace of a predator, here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Rebecca and tell her you've changed your mind. You're going to contact Helen Martinez and drop her as your lawyer. And you're going to sit quietly beside me tomorrow morning as I announce my promotion to CEO. In return, I'll ensure you maintain your current lifestyle. It's more than fair, considering the alternative. I stood there, feeling the weight of 12 years of manipulation pressing down on me. But something was different now. Instead of feeling crushed, I felt a strange sense of clarity. "You know what's interesting about betrayal, James?" I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It makes you reevaluate everything. Every conversation, every relationship, every seemingly coincidental meeting." I pulled out my phone and pressed play on a recording app. James's voice filled the room. "Emily's always been good at staying in the background, watching, reporting, just like she did at Stanford." His face changed, the confident smile faltering for the first time. "That's inadmissible," he said quickly. "You recorded me without consent." "True," I agreed, "but I wasn't recording for court. I was recording for Emily's husband, Mike. You see, while you were having Emily follow me, I had someone following her. Would you like to guess what your loyal spy has been doing during those supposed tennis lessons with her trainer?" I pulled out my own envelope and laid out a different set of photographs. Emily, looking considerably more intimate with her young tennis instructor than a student-teacher relationship would warrant. "Mike is expecting these photos tomorrow morning," I continued, "along with detailed records of every payment you've made to Emily over the years. I wonder how your perfect spy will handle her own life imploding." James's face had gone pale. "You're bluffing," he said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Am I? You taught me well, James. Always have leverage. Isn't that what you always say? But here's what you never understood. While you were busy playing chess, collecting pawns like Emily, I was playing a different game entirely." I walked to the door and opened it. Standing there, right on cue, was Claire Martinez, flanked by 2 FBI agents. "Remember me, Mr. Morrison?" Claire asked, her voice hard as steel. "We have a lot to talk about." What happened next would redefine not just my life, but the lives of everyone James had ever manipulated. But first, there was one more revelation to come, one that would force me to question everything I thought I knew about Catherine Roy's role in this story. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of FBI interviews, legal documents, and revelations that shook my world to its foundation. James spent the night in federal custody, his carefully constructed facade crumbling as agents combed through our home and his office. But it was my early morning meeting with Catherine Roy that truly changed everything. She was waiting for me in her office when I arrived at 7 a.m., looking as if she hadn't slept at all. The morning light cast long shadows across her desk, where a single file lay unopened. "Before the FBI finishes their investigation," she said without preamble, "there's something you need to know." She opened the file and slid it across the desk. Claire Martinez wasn't James's first victim. I was. The document before me was dated 25 years ago. A harassment complaint filed by a young Catherine Roy against her then supervisor at Goldman Sachs, James Morrison. "He was different back then," Catherine said, her voice distant. "Younger, less polished, more obvious in his manipulations. When I threatened to expose his financial misconduct, he made sure I was discredited and fired. That's why I left banking for academia." My mind raced back through every interaction, every piece of advice Catherine had given me over the years. "The alumni event," I said slowly. "You didn't introduce me to James hoping I'd expose him. You introduced me because you knew he couldn't resist." She nodded, looking older than I'd ever seen her. "I used you as bait, Sarah. I knew his type. Successful women with potential he could slowly destroy. I thought if I could monitor the situation, gather evidence over time." She trailed off, the weight of her confession heavy in the air. "You watched him break me down," I said, my voice shaking. "Year after year you watched and said nothing." "I did," she admitted, "and I will carry that guilt forever. But I also made sure you had the tools you'd need when the time came. Every paper I assigned you on corporate fraud, every case study on psychological manipulation, every networking contact I encouraged you to maintain, I was preparing you for this moment." I stood up, needing to put physical distance between us. "Does Claire know?" "Yes. I told her everything last night. She understands better than anyone the price of playing the long game with James Morrison." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Emily's husband Mike just went public. Check your email." The email contained a press release from Mike's law firm, publicly detailing Emily's role in James's schemes and announcing their immediate divorce. Attached was a personal note from Mike. "Thank you for warning me. I've been suspicious for months but couldn't prove anything. The kids and I are leaving for my parents' house today." Catherine read the email over my shoulder. "Emily was my blind spot," she admitted. "I never suspected she was working for him since Stanford. It seems James learned from his mistake with me. He started recruiting his spies much younger." "What happens now?" I asked, feeling the weight of all these revelations. "Now," Catherine said, picking up her phone, "we complete what we started. The FBI has enough to charge James with financial fraud, but with your testimony and Rebecca's evidence about his pattern of psychological manipulation and coercion, we can ensure he never does this to another woman." Just then, Helen Martinez burst into the office, her usually composed demeanor cracking with excitement. "You need to see this," she said, turning on Catherine's office TV. The news was showing live footage of James being led out of the federal building. But what caught my attention was the crowd of women gathered outside. Former employees, assistants, and associates from every company he'd worked for, all coming forward with their own stories of manipulation and abuse. "This is why I waited," Catherine said softly. One victim he could discredit. 2 or 3 he could dismiss as disgruntled employees. But 30 women, all with similar stories, supported by concrete evidence? Not even James Morrison can charm his way out of that. As I watched the scene unfold on television, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number, containing a single photograph. James and Emily at a hidden beach house property neither of them was supposed to have access to, dated just 2 weeks ago. The message came with a note. "Thought you might want to add this to the pile. Claire." I stared at the photo, a final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "Catherine," I said slowly, "what do you know about James's newest business venture?" Her expression sharpened. "Only what's been in the business press." "Why?" "Because I think we've been looking at this all wrong. The shell companies, the beach house, Emily's involvement. It's not just about the money or the manipulation. I think James is planning something bigger, and tomorrow's board meeting isn't just about his CEO promotion." What I didn't know then was that my intuition was right, but the truth was far more disturbing than even I had imagined. And the evidence was hidden in the last place any of us would think to look: my own consulting client files. Back in my home office, I stared at my laptop screen, my consulting files spread out before me in digital form. 3 years of client work, hundreds of small businesses I'd helped streamline their operations. I'd always kept meticulous records, something James had mocked as obsessive. But now those records might hold the key to understanding his larger plan. "Look for patterns," Claire suggested over our video call. She'd been analyzing financial data for hours, her compliance officer expertise proving invaluable. "James never does anything randomly." Rebecca, who joined us at Catherine's office, leaned closer to her screen. "Wait. Sarah, can you pull up the list of clients from last year?" I opened the spreadsheet, and suddenly it hit me. Over the past 18 months, I'd consulted for 15 small tech companies, all working in supply chain management or inventory control, all struggling, all perfect acquisition targets. "He used me," I whispered, the realization dawning. My consulting work wasn't just providing cover for his illegal transfers. I was unknowingly doing his due diligence for him. Catherine's sharp intake of breath told me she'd reached the same conclusion. "The board meeting tomorrow. He's not just pursuing a CEO position, he's planning a hostile takeover," I finished. "These small companies, my clients, they're all pieces of a bigger puzzle. With their combined technologies, he could control the entire supply chain management sector," Rebecca finished. "The shell companies, the hidden money, it wasn't just about personal gain. He's been positioning himself to buy these companies at rock-bottom prices, using insider information from your consulting reports," Claire added grimly. "That's securities fraud on top of everything else." My hands were shaking as I scrolled through my files. Every recommendation I'd made, every weakness I'd identified, every suggestion for improvement. I'd handed James a roadmap to exploit these vulnerable companies. "Sarah," Helen's voice cut through my spiral of guilt. "This is exactly what we need. Your records prove you had no knowledge of his intentions. More importantly, they prove premeditation on his part. But I was barely listening. Another pattern had caught my eye. A series of emails from Emily over the past year, asking casual questions about specific clients. At the time, I'd thought she was just showing interest in my work. Now, she wasn't just spying on me, I said slowly. She was his broker. Look at these dates. I pulled up another spreadsheet. Every time I consulted for a tech company, Emily's husband's law firm acquired shares in that company within weeks. Small amounts, nothing to trigger regulatory attention, but enough to gain voting rights. Catherine was already on her phone. Helen, we need to stop that board meeting. If James gets control, he won't, I interrupted, an idea forming. Because we're going to beat him at his own game. I turned to my laptop and began typing rapidly. Rebecca, I need you to contact every one of these companies. Claire, start tracking those share purchases. Catherine, I need you to help me prepare for a different kind of presentation tomorrow. The next few hours were intense. As night fell over the city, our small team worked tirelessly, pulling together documents, making calls, and building a case that would not only stop James's takeover, but protect the companies he'd targeted. Around midnight, Rebecca brought us coffee and a revelation. 3 of the tech companies are willing to testify. They suspected something was wrong when they started receiving aggressive buyout offers but couldn't prove anything. Make that 4, Claire called from her laptop. I just got off the phone with TechFlow's CEO. She's had her suspicions about Mike's law firm for months. As the pieces came together, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at how James had used my work, guilt over my unwitting role in his scheme, but also a growing sense of purpose. For years, I'd used my skills to help small businesses thrive. Now I would use those same skills to protect them. What none of us realized was that someone else had been monitoring our activities. As we prepared for the confrontation at tomorrow's board meeting, another player was making their own moves. Someone whose connection to James went back even further than Catherine's, and whose revelation would force me to make the hardest decision of my life. The sun was rising when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained just 4 words, but they changed everything. I'm James's first wife. Her name was Diana Mitchell, and she was nothing like I'd imagined. We met at 6 a.m. in a quiet cafe near the company headquarters, hours before the board meeting that would decide everything. She was elegant, composed, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from surviving the worst and rebuilding yourself. I've been following your story, she said, stirring her coffee. When I saw the news about James's arrest, I knew it was time. She pulled out a leather portfolio and laid it on the table. 20 years ago, I was you, young, ambitious, believing I could change him. The portfolio contained newspaper clippings, old photographs, and documents that told a story James had carefully erased from his history. Diana had been a rising star in investment banking when she met James at his first firm. Their marriage lasted 3 years, ending when she discovered his attempts to steal her clients and undermine her career. The difference is, I didn't fight back, Diana said, her voice tinged with old regret. I was too ashamed, too worried about my professional reputation. I took a job in London and disappeared from his life. By the time I learned about Catherine's complaint at Goldman Sachs, it was too late. Why come forward now? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Because of this. She opened her laptop and showed me a series of emails between James and a private investigator from 6 months ago. They were searching for information about a teenage boy named Marcus, Diana's son, James's son. He found out about Marcus recently, Diana explained. I was already pregnant when I left, but I never told him. Marcus is 18 now, just starting college. When I saw James was looking for him, she took a deep breath. A man like James doesn't want a son. He wants a pawn. I couldn't let him do to Marcus what he's done to everyone else. The implications hit me hard. James hadn't just been planning a business takeover. He'd been preparing to create a legacy. The timing of his divorce plans, the elaborate scheme with the tech companies, he was building an empire he could pass on to the son he'd just discovered. There's more, Diana said, pulling out one final document. Yesterday, after his arrest, James made a call to his lawyer. They don't know I still have access to certain accounts, but I saw the transfer order. He's liquidating everything, preparing to run. The board meeting today isn't just about the takeover anymore. It's his last chance to secure enough assets to disappear. My phone buzzed with messages from Catherine and Helen. They were waiting at the office with our presentation. But looking at Diana, I knew we needed to change our approach. "Come with me," I said suddenly. "The board needs to hear your story." She hesitated. "I left that life behind. And James is still destroying lives," I countered. "You survived him. Catherine survived him. I survived him. But how many others won't if we don't stop him now?" The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Helen and Catherine helped us integrate Diana's evidence into our presentation. Rebecca coordinated with the tech company CEOs who were standing by to testify via video conference. Claire finished her analysis of the share purchases, revealing the full extent of James and Emily's manipulation. At 9 a.m., I walked into the boardroom with Diana beside me. The board members were already seated, looking uncomfortable. They'd clearly heard about James's arrest. His lawyer sat at one end of the table, clutching a thick folder of documents I suspected contained the takeover proposals. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady. "You were expecting a presentation about James Morrison's vision for this company's future. Instead, I'm going to tell you a story about its past, and about the man you've trusted with your company's legacy. What happened next would be talked about in business circles for years to come. But the real story wasn't in the dramatic revelations or the shocking evidence. It was in the quiet moment when Diana stood up to speak, her voice carrying 20 years of silent truth. And it was in the expression on James's lawyer's face when he realized that this time, there would be no elegant escape for his client. But even as we laid out our case, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still missing something crucial. James had always been too clever, too prepared, to not have one final contingency plan. The answer was hidden somewhere in plain sight, and I had less than an hour to figure it out before he could set it in motion. The revelation hit me halfway through my presentation to the board. I was showing them the pattern of share acquisitions when something clicked, a detail so obvious I'd almost missed it. I stopped mid-sentence, pulling up my consulting files on the projector. "Mr. Chen," I said, addressing our CFO, "could you please pull up the company's offshore investment records from the past year?" He looked startled, but complied. As the numbers appeared on screen, I felt a cold certainty settle over me. "Notice anything familiar about these investment patterns?" Catherine caught on first, her sharp intake of breath barely audible. The company hadn't just been James's victim, it had been his unwitting accomplice. He'd been using corporate funds to secretly buy shares in my client companies through a maze of shell corporations, planning to use the company's own resources to fund his takeover. "If this goes public," I explained to the stunned board members, "your stock will plummet." James knew that. It was his insurance policy. If he went down, he'd take the entire company with him. The room erupted in chaos. Board members demanded explanations. James's lawyer started gathering his papers, and I could see our carefully planned presentation derailing. But then Diana stood up, her voice cutting through the noise. 20 years ago, I made the mistake of staying quiet to protect my reputation," she said. "I watched a good company burn to protect James Morrison's secrets. Are you prepared to do the same?" The next few hours were intense. While the board went into emergency session, our team worked frantically to find a solution. It was Rebecca who finally proposed the answer, a way to unwind the illegal investments while protecting both the company and the smaller tech firms. "We don't dismantle the investment structure," she suggested. "We legitimize it. Turn James's planned hostile takeover into a proper innovation initiative. The small tech companies get the support they need, the company gets valuable technology assets, and everyone's stock stays stable." It was elegant, ethical, and exactly the opposite of what James would have done. The board approved it unanimously. As the day drew to a close, I found myself back in my office, packing up my personal items. I'd resigned from my position as James's wife's role in the company, but the board had made me an unexpected offer: to lead the new technology integration initiative as CEO of a newly formed subsidiary. Catherine found me there, looking at an old photo from my Stanford days. You knew, didn't you? I asked. That's why you pushed me toward supply chain consulting. You were preparing me for this moment. She smiled. I knew you had it in you. I just had to wait for you to remember who you were before James. Diana joined us, looking more relaxed than she had all day. Marcus wants to meet you, she said. When I told him what happened, he said you taught him something important, that it's never too late to rewrite your story. That night, as I sat in my new apartment, I received an email from one of my former clients, the CEO of a small tech startup. She'd attached a magazine article she was planning to publish, profiling women in tech who were changing the industry. I was on the cover. The headline read, "From supporting character to leading role, how Sarah Mitchell transformed corporate culture." James saw it too, from his jail cell awaiting trial. I heard he threw such a fit that they had to put him in solitary confinement. But by then, I was too busy building something new to care about his tantrums. 1 year later, I stood on a stage at a women's leadership conference, looking out at a sea of faces. Emily was there too, in the audience, not as my friend anymore, but as one of many women attending my workshop on recognizing and escaping toxic workplace relationships. She wouldn't meet my eyes, but I saw her taking notes. Rebecca sat in the front row, now heading our corporate compliance department. Claire had flown in from Seattle, where she was mentoring young women in finance. Catherine watched proudly from the side, while Diana, who'd become a close friend, sat with her son Marcus, now interning in our tech development team. People often ask me how I found the courage to start over, I told the audience. The truth is, I didn't start over. I simply remembered who I was meant to be. Each of us has that power, to rewrite our role in our own story. Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind us, but that strength? It was there all along. As I stepped off the stage to thundering applause, my phone buzzed with a text from Helen. Guess who just accepted a plea deal? James had finally broken, facing the weight of evidence from all the women he'd tried to destroy. He would serve 15 years for fraud, with no possibility of early release. But standing there, surrounded by women who were rewriting their own stories, I realized something important. James hadn't been the protagonist of this story for a long time. In trying to keep me as a supporting character in his life, he'd accidentally given me the push I needed to become the hero of my own. That evening, I had dinner with Diana, Catherine, Rebecca, and Claire. We toasted to new beginnings and shared secrets, to broken chains and rebuilt dreams. And as I looked around the table at these powerful women who had become my closest allies, I smiled, remembering James's words from that fateful dinner party. You're just a supporting character in my life. He'd been wrong. We were all protagonists. Every woman who'd ever been told to dim her light, to play a smaller role, to accept less than she deserved. And our stories were just beginning. As for me, I had a company to run, women to mentor, and a legacy to build. Not bad for a supporting character, wouldn't you say?